This is a homily for the feast of Saints Peter and Paul. The second reading is from the second letter of St. Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verses 6 to 8 and 17 and 18. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 16, verses 13 to 19. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. Today we celebrate the third of the great feasts that follow the Easter season. Although the feast of Saints Peter and Paul is celebrated on a Sunday only when June the 29th happens to fall on a Sunday. Next Sunday, we recommence the readings from Ordinary Time. It may seem unusual that there are not separate feast days for Saints Peter and Paul, but the fact that they share a feast day reflects the fact that both died in the persecution unleashed by the Emperor Nero in 64 AD. In a homily preached in the year 395 AD, St. Augustine says this: "Both apostles share the same feast day, for these two were one. And even though they suffered on different days, they were as one. Peter went first, and Paul followed. And so we celebrate this day made holy for us by the apostles' blood. Let us embrace what they believed, their life, their labours, their sufferings, their preaching, and their confession of faith." Though Peter and Paul are often depicted embracing one another, as you can see in this icon, there were, on occasion, tensions between them. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul accuses Peter of hypocrisy. Peter had come to Antioch, the third largest city in the Roman Empire, after Rome and Alexandria. The Christians at Antioch had made a practice of eating together, Jews at table with Gentiles. However, some Christians from Jerusalem found this practice objectionable. Here's how Paul describes his confrontation with Peter, whom he refers to by his Aramaic name Cephas. "When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood self-condemned. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. And the other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, 'If you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews?'" So, as you can see, things between Peter and Paul did not always run smoothly. Peter and Paul suffered martyrdom at Rome under Nero, Peter by crucifixion, Paul by beheading. The two have been commemorated together on June the 29th since the middle of the 3rd century. Let's turn to Peter first. After Jesus, Peter is the figure most frequently cited in the New Testament writings. He is mentioned 154 times as Peter, 75 times as Simon, and 7 times as Cephas, the Aramaic name that Jesus gave him. We know that Peter lived in Capernaum, which is located on the Via Maris, the major trade route between Syria and Egypt. Capernaum comes from the Hebrew meaning village of Nahum. In Mark chapter 2 verse 1, Capernaum is called the oikos, the home of Jesus. As far as we can tell, the population of Capernaum at the time of Jesus was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people. In chapter 1 of Mark's Gospel, Jesus leaves the synagogue where he had just cast out an unclean spirit from a man who was possessed, and moves immediately to the house of Simon and Andrew. He enters Simon's house, just a few minutes' walk from the synagogue, as you can see from this photograph. This modern church, completed in 1990, is built over the ruins of Peter's house. The church was raised up both to protect the ruins, but also to allow visitors to view them from above. The floor of the central part of the church is built of thick glass, enabling visitors to look down onto the structure below. Here you can see the ruins of Peter's house prior to the construction of the present church. Ageria, a Christian woman who made a 3-year journey through Egypt, Palestine, Syria, and across Asia Minor to Constantinople, visited Capernaum sometime between 381 and 384 AD. She wrote, "The house of the Prince of the Apostles has been made into a church, with its original walls still standing." 2 centuries later, the Piacenza pilgrim wrote, "The house of St. Peter is now a basilica." Today's Gospel is set in Caesarea Philippi. Here you can see a map of Herod the Great's kingdom. On this map, Caesarea Philippi is named Panias. Panias was named after the Greek god Pan. You might also see it named as Banias, which is an Arabic corruption of the name Panias. In 20 BC, the Roman Emperor Augustus gave the district of Panias to Herod the Great. Herod ruled as king of Judea from 37 BC until 4 BC, subject, of course, to the authority of Rome. And so Herod renamed the town Caesarea in honour of Caesar Augustus. As an expression of his gratitude, he also built a magnificent marble temple in 19 BC in honour of the emperor. The temple was known as the Augusteum. Here you can see an illustration of the Augusteum. So, against the backdrop of a temple dedicated to the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus, Jesus asks his disciples a question. "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" The disciples reply to Jesus, "Some say he is John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Jesus then asks the disciples, "But you, who do you say I am?" It is Simon Peter who replies, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus then says to Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." So this is not a conclusion that Simon reached through his own intuition. He has received a divine revelation. Jesus then says, "So I now say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the underworld will never overpower it." Let's consider for a moment the significance of the name change. Peter's name was Simon, son of John. But Jesus, speaking in Aramaic, said that from now onwards Peter's name would be Kepha, which is the Aramaic word for rock. Simon is to be the rock on which Jesus builds his new community, the church. Matthew's Gospel was written in Greek. In Greek it would read, "You are Petros, and upon this Petra I will build my church." The word for rock in Greek is feminine and ends with an alpha. The masculine form of the word ends in omicron sigma, Petros. If we made a literal translation of the Greek into English, it would read, "You are rock, and on this rock I will build my church." So Peter is to be the foundation stone upon which Jesus establishes the church. Jesus has singled out Peter and given him a unique role. So Petros was not only a name, it was a mandate that Simon received from the Lord. But at this point in time, Peter still has much to learn. After Jesus had appointed Simon the rock on which he will build the church, and entrusted to him the keys of the kingdom of heaven, he then tells the disciples the fate that awaits him in Jerusalem. We're then told that Peter began to rebuke him. "Heaven preserve you, Lord, this must not happen to you." Jesus then says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, because you are thinking not as God thinks, but as humans do." Peter has yet to learn that Jesus the Messiah had not come to impose his power and transform the world instantly. Rather, he is a Messiah who has chosen the path of humility and suffering. But it is a lesson that in time Peter will learn, even laying down his own life. Eusebius, Bishop of Caesarea in Palestine, tells us in his ecclesiastical history that Peter was crucified head downwards, for he had requested that he might suffer in this way. Eusebius, citing Clement of Alexandria, tells us that Peter's wife was also executed shortly before he was. In Book 3, Chapter 30, he writes, "When blessed Peter saw his own wife led away to execution, he rejoiced because of her summons and her return home, and called to her in a comforting and encouraging voice, addressing her by name and saying, 'O thou, remember the Lord.' Such was the marriage of these blessed ones." We know that St. Peter had a wife because Jesus healed her mother. What became of his wife once Peter left his nets and his livelihood to follow Jesus? Was she left at home to look after the children and extended family, including her mother? The Gospels are silent, but St. Paul isn't. Writing to the Corinthians, Paul says, "And do we not have the right to be accompanied by a wife who is a sister, like the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas?" Sister Kathleen Glavich has written a novel entitled The Fisherman's Wife. It's the story of St. Peter's wife, whom Sister Kathleen names Miriam. It is, of course, a work of fiction, because the New Testament tells us nothing about Peter's wife except that she accompanied him on his later missionary journeys. But wouldn't it be intriguing if Peter's wife had written the gospel about Jesus and his disciples from her point of view, the gospel according to St. Peter's wife? Taking a cue from St. Clement of Alexandria, Sister Glavich recreates the scene of the martyrdom of Peter's wife. Roman soldiers, their armour clanking, approach our cell. Peter and I get awkwardly to our feet, and Peter hugs me fiercely. Then he holds my hands until a squat Roman soldier with bad breath roughly separates us and binds my hands together with rope. The soldier shoves me towards the door, making me stumble. Regaining my balance, I square my shoulders, determined to face my destiny with dignity. As I leave the cell, Peter calls after me in a strained voice, "Miriam bird, remember the Lord." All the way to my place of execution in the circus, I visualize the face of Jesus as I knew him in Capernaum. I am shaking like a fig leaf in the wind. but in my heart I know that my death will be just a door. Soon I will be on the other side of that door and behold my Lord Jesus face to face once more. I trust in his promise of eternal life for those who believe. In time, Peter will join us, and we will share an everlasting love. We will never be parted again. Sister Glavich is not the only one intrigued by Peter's wife. The current TV series The Chosen also gives her a prominent role. There's one moving scene in which Jesus speaks to Peter's wife. I told Simon to make sacrifices and leave things behind in order to follow me. You are one flesh with Simon. He cannot make sacrifices that are not also yours. You have a role to play in all of this. But I see you. You understand? I know it is not easy to be at home when your husband is out doing all of this, even when you are excited about it and proud of him. We know that Peter's ministry took him as far as Rome, where he was martyred during the persecution of Nero, sometime in the mid-60s. The place of his execution was the Circus of Caligula, also known as the Circus of Nero. It is located on Mons Vaticanus, or Vatican Hill, outside the city walls of Rome. He was buried in an ancient cemetery adjacent to the circus. Pope St. Anacletus, the second successor of St. Peter as Bishop of Rome, built a memorial shrine on the site. Archaeological excavations between 1939 and 1950 unearthed both the tomb and the relics of St. Peter. Here is another view of the circus and the necropolis alongside it. In the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine built a basilica over the site. Proof that this basilica was built right over the grave is suggested by several facts. Firstly, the profanation of a Roman cemetery was a criminal offence in Roman law. So why would Constantine unnecessarily provoke hostility and opposition? Secondly, this was such an inhospitable site on which to build. It required tons of rubble to level out the ground, and there were other more suitable sites on level ground close by. Constantine chose this awkward site of an existing cemetery on the slopes of a hill for the foundation of his great basilica, because he was convinced that the remains of St. Peter lay buried there. By the 15th century, it became evident that the old St. Peter's, by then more than 1,000 years old, was in serious need of repair or reconstruction. It was decided that a new basilica would have to be built. The foundation stone of the new St. Peter's was laid on April the 18th, 1506, and work continued for the next century and a half, giving us the basilica that we know today. So, St. Peter's Basilica was rebuilt in the 16th and 17th centuries, between 1506 and 1626. This diagram shows the Circus of Nero in red, Old St. Peter's in yellow, and the St. Peter's that we know today in green. The necropolis where St. Peter was buried is in violet. Like Constantine's basilica, the new St. Peter's was built over the grave of St. Peter, over the necropolis adjacent to the Circus of Nero. One final detail. Note the obelisk in the circus. It's circled in red. That is the same obelisk that now stands right in the middle of St. Peter's Square. It was brought from Egypt to Rome by the Emperor Caligula in 37 AD and placed in the circus he had constructed. In 1586, during the construction of the new St. Peter's, Pope Sixtus V had Domenico Fontana move the obelisk to the centre of St. Peter's Square. It was a huge endeavour involving over 900 workers, 140 horses and 47 winches. You can see from this aerial photograph where the obelisk had been located and where it now stands in the centre of St. Peter's Square. The plaque that you can see here marks the site of the obelisk until 1586. Standing as it once did in the circus of Caligula or Nero, it remains a silent witness to the martyrdom of St. Peter. Let us now turn to St. Paul. Paul was also martyred in Rome, sometime between 64 and 67 AD. Eusebius tells us that he was beheaded. His tomb is in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. The sarcophagus lies directly under the high altar. To be able to see it, the pilgrim must descend into the area known as the Confessio. Here you can read, partly obscured, Sarcophagus Sancti Pauli. You may ask, are the bones of St. Paul really present here? Father Edmund Power, a Benedictine monk who was abbot of St. Paul's outside the walls from 2005 to 2015, tells us this. For 16 centuries, no one had any idea what might be contained in the 4th century sarcophagus. It was not until the year 2006 that a limited investigation was conducted using the technique of fibre optics to see within the sarcophagus. At the same time, it was possible to extract some fragments of bone and cloth. In 2009, during a homily in the Basilica, Pope Benedict XVI mentioned this investigation. Scientific dating of the fragments supported the unwavering tradition that these are, in fact, the remains of the Apostle of the Gentiles. The traditional site of Paul's execution is marked by the Church of the Three Fountains. Above the main entrance to the church we read, "The place of the martyrdom of St. Paul the Apostle, where 3 fountains wonderfully sprung forth." Today's second reading is taken from St. Paul's second letter to Timothy. It was written while St. Paul was in prison awaiting his trial in Rome. In the Roman Empire, prisons were not places to which people were sentenced as a punishment. Prisons were simply places where people awaited trial. If found innocent, the prisoner was freed. If guilty, he would be punished. That meant he could be exiled, executed, fined, or reduced to slavery. So Paul is awaiting trial. He realizes that his death is imminent. He speaks of his life's work coming to an end with the expectation of a crown of victory for his faithful ministry. Looking back over his life, he uses an interesting metaphor. My life is being poured out like a libation. A libation was the offering of a liquid, such as wine, that was poured out during a sacrifice in the Jewish temple, such as the daily Holocaust. A libation of wine normally accompanied burnt and peace offerings. The entire libation was poured out. Paul is saying, in so many words, my entire life has been a pouring out, an emptying out on behalf of the gospel. For many of us, the good life is not about emptying, but filling up. The more I've got, the happier I am. The more I've got, the more impressive my life has been. Look at the treasure house of my ego. I've accumulated lots of things: fame, esteem, success, money, assets, power, privilege, awards received, degrees earned. None of that would have impressed Paul. A life well lived is not about accumulating more and more. It is rather an emptying out on behalf of the gospel. Paul measures his life not by what he's accumulated, but by how much he's given away. In his letter to the Philippians, Paul writes this: "For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things, and I regard them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ." Paul then goes on to say in his letter to Timothy, "The time has come for me to be gone." A literal translation of Paul's Greek text is, "The time to loose the moorings has come." It's the image of a ship that is about to set sail. Paul sees his whole life as a preparation for this journey to come. For him, death is not an ending, but a beginning. Paul then tells us, "I have fought the good fight." Throughout his life, Paul has been a passionate advocate of the gospel, and he often encountered opposition. Winston Churchill once said, "Never trust a man who has no enemies. He stands for nothing." Well, that could never be said of St. Paul. In his second letter to the Corinthians, he tells us what he has had to endure for the sake of the gospel. "5 times I have received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. For a night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers and sisters, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, hungry and thirsty, often without food, cold and naked." On the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, Pope St. John Paul II had this to say: "In their apostolic mission, Saints Peter and Paul were obliged to face difficulties of every kind. But far from deterring their missionary activity, these difficulties reinforced their zeal for the Church's welfare and for the salvation of mankind. They were able to overcome every trial because their trust was not based on human resources, but on the grace of the Lord, who, as the readings of today's solemnity recall, delivers his friends from every evil and saves them for his kingdom. It is this same trust in God which must also sustain us. Yes, the Lord delivers his friends. This awareness must instill courage in us as we face the difficulties encountered in proclaiming the gospel in daily life. May our holy patrons, Peter and Paul, sustain us and obtain for us that missionary zeal which made them witnesses of Christ to the ends of the then known world.